Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hi everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It's terrific to have you here. Now, before I introduce our guest today, I just want to let you know that if you are a dental practice owner and you want to get the good oil on how to create a practice and a life that you love, then head across to the Savvy Dentist Facebook group. You can get there by going to drjessegreen.com/Facebook. And in there, we've got some tools and tips and trainings that'll help you on your way to practice ownership and create the life that you love out of that. Now, my guest today is Sally Arnold. I've known Sally now for goodness knows how many years, and Sally began her professional life as a flautist of all things, and she spent a lot of her career in the performing arts and the creative arts, so much so that she was the business development manager for the Australian Ballet. These days, Sally's a psychotherapist and she's trained in that area, and she's got a lot of experience in business. She's got a lot of experience in creative thinking, and she works as a high performance coach to help people who are stuck get unstuck and move forward, whether they're part of a team, whether they're the business owner. She's got everyone covered. So Sally, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and hang with us.
Jesse, it's really good to be here, and it's good to hear your voice after a few years.
I know, we haven't spoken for a little while. We're just talking that it was at Manly in Sydney when we caught up, in that beautiful location near the beach there. It's a really nice spot. We were both at a conference and it was great. Sally, your background is rich and interesting, and obviously everyone's life is a bit of a tapestry of things. I'm just curious to ask if you could just give our audience a bit of a sense of your background, because I think it'll give context for the conversation that we're going to have thereafter.
Okay, sure, Jesse. Well, my life started in little old Christchurch in New Zealand. So I was a sort of a country girl, and I came across to Australia when I was actually 18 because I discovered that I had a talent for music and a talent for playing the flute. And in those days, Christchurch was very much a farming town. So I went to Adelaide Uni because there was a great flute teacher there. And then, typical me, because I'm very inventive and quite entrepreneurial, I decided after several years at Adelaide Uni doing performance of flute to go to Sydney. And who does this? And it was about the time that Jesus Christ Superstar, the show, the original show, was going to be on in Sydney. Mm-hmm. And of course, I rang up Harry Miller, and they didn't have a job straight away. But before the show started, they rang me and they said, "We've got a role here for the principal flute. Come in an audition." And I did. So I went from being a classically trained flautist to a rock star. And that was sort of the start of, I guess, I realized then that you can be trained in one area, but you can sort of leverage out into so many others. So I was in the show for quite some time, a couple of years, went to London, studied there again, which we all do as musicians, came back, did my work at the Opera House with the Opera Ballet Orchestra, came down to Melbourne. And then what I did, Jesse, when I was about 26, I realised I had a hearing problem, which for a musician is not a good thing to have.
Yeah.
And being the ambitious soul I am, I realised that I wasn't going to get into the Berlin Philharmonic or the London orchestras. So I just knew I had to make a total career change, and I didn't want to be a teacher. So my passion is food and cooking.
Yeah.
So at the age of 26, not knowing a thing about retail, I opened a gourmet cookware shop in South Yarra called Sally's Cook Shop. Wind that ahead, the Bloom family, who bought Buckley & Nunn, which is now David Jones, found out about me and asked me to join them to sort of redo their department store, their homeware store. So I did that. So I'm very good at taking something that's pretty crumbling into a really cool environment, profitable environment. Did that for a number of years, travelled again, and after a few years, I realised that I was missing the arts, and the Aussie Ballet job was advertised. Same thing. I thought, I'm going to get this job, and I did.
Great.
So that was about 6 or 7 years heading up the Australian ballet business team globally and getting about $2 million a year in funding. And then something else happened in my life which totally took me into the career path I'm doing now. my husband, Tony, had a really challenging business deal that just didn't work. He was a real estate property developer, and we virtually lost everything, or nearly everything. So we went from what I call flying at the front of the plane to the back. And during that time, he found out that he had prostate cancer and only had a few years to live. So within a few years, basically, my life went from plentiful to not much. But the thing that sort of kept me going, and I've often wondered, Jesse, where this came from, was this desire not to be a victim. And I knew that at the age of around 40, I had to start again, and I had to start my life again. So that's where I thought, okay, I'm going to put all my bits together. I'll put my performance background, I'll put my business background together. And then I knew I had to study psychotherapy because I had to get my head together. So I did that because a career psychologist said to me, you can't work with other people unless you know yourself. So
fair enough.
So that's what I did. And so I put all my careers together. And because I had to do a lot of what I had to train in, I had to go through that, I really I feel like I'm the wounded healer. If anyone brings me a problem that's really challenging, I can solve it because I've been through it myself.
Yeah.
And it's not just textbook stuff. So that's a bit about me. And it's all about, my work is all about creativity. It's about purpose. It's about passion. But the most important thing is it's not being stuck and staying as a victim. It's about there are ways forward and you've got to take some risks.
Yeah, wow, Sally, there are so many threads of that conversation I'd love to pick up with your permission. I'd like to ask you about the reinvention phase, because the going from plentiful to not much, particularly where Tony, obviously that would have been a very traumatic experience for you, and I can only imagine what that must have been like. But I'm curious to ask, what's the emotional journey when you feel like that rug that you've been standing on is suddenly pulled out from under you, economically, emotionally? What does that feel like?
Oh, Jesse, I can still remember the day that it all happened. I can still remember it at the ballet, and Tony Tony rang me and said, look, this business has collapsed. There's a legal trial just about to happen. You're going to have to come in and get me. I actually passed out at the ballet, and I remember the CEO of the ballet came around with a brandy, and I can tell you brandy revives. It does. So this is a funny side to it. I came to very quickly. I remember just thinking, my life is so good at the moment, or has been so good. We had a great relationship. We lived in a wonderful, wonderful home. We travelled a lot. We worked long hours. And I just said to myself, I don't want my life to change. Now, it wasn't as if I was standing still. I was doing a heap of stuff. But suddenly it was like this brick wall came down, and I hit it. I hit it at a 1,000 miles an hour almost. So the feelings were, I didn't even know what to do. So my stepdaughter actually said to me, you're going to have to go and see a psychologist. And I did. Look, luckily I got in to see one within a week, cried my way through that, but it felt better because I thought I was the only person with this problem, of feeling absolutely like, what was the purpose of my life? What was I going to do? How was I going to keep moving ahead? So that was emotionally absolutely draining. And I remember waking up every morning feeling sick. I just felt sick. And it was in that time that it's a really interesting story. I was still at the ballet, and the ballet said to me one day, it was only a few months after this had happened, they said, we'd love you to go to London to run the Royal Gala. And that was when Princess Diana was going to be coming along. Mm-hmm. And, everything had been shocking. And I thought, how can I do this? So I got on the plane, and I remember drinking my way all the way to London and getting there thinking, I've got to represent Australia, and this is going to be such a big deal, hosting the Royal Gala with Diana. And look, long story short, I had so much support in London from the ambassador, from the heads and CEOs of various companies, that it was just an unbelievable success. So that sort of showed me that I was just so fortunate to have, I had the ballet behind me, and that was one of the most important things, that they supported me. They got me sort of out of the poor me victim stuff to London. I thought, here I am in London where I've got a husband whose business has gone down the tube, and we didn't know about the cancer at that stage, and I'm running a Royal Gala. I'm running something that's momentous. And I guess what it showed me, Jesse, that you can you have to get in touch with a part of yourself. You have to go inside. And also at that time, I need to say too, my stepdaughter again was a meditation teacher. So she got someone to teach me to meditate, and that saved my life.
Yeah. Wow.
On meditation, I can tell you, my gosh, meditation every day. I just did it religiously every day, and it made me really calm. The challenge didn't go away, but it gave me a sense of okayness. It wasn't as if all this stuff was hitting me in the head all the time, and I was thinking, how can I keep going?
Yeah.
So I mean, when I think of COVID at the moment, I'll be honest, I mean, COVID is probably nowhere near quite as bad as what happened in those few years.
Goodness, no. So, Sally, again, I don't want to labour on negativity, because I'm actually fairly optimistic about where we're at the moment and things that are happening, and by nature fairly optimistic. But I do want to ask you about, and with your consent, that
yes,
with Tony's illness after that, having two blows in relatively quick succession, how do you bounce back from that?
Okay, so what I did was, and that also saved me, I went and did psychotherapy training for 3 years. Now, oh my gosh, that was tough. That was really tough, because even though I was going through that challenge with Tony, I really didn't know myself that well psychologically, and I thought I did. I thought I really knew myself. So I had to get down to the nuts and bolts of who Sally Arnold was at that stage, and I had to sort of really, and when you're a psychotherapist too, it's not like being a psychologist. You have to go through all the different challenges, the emotions, the feelings. You have to go to the core of them, because basically our teachers would say, well, you're going to be pretty useless if you're going to work with someone if you haven't been through your own shit.
Yeah.
So really, for me, my psychotherapy training, that saved me, and that just gave me a sense of having a foundation. It was like, if you think of building a house, I didn't have the house around me, but I had sort of the concrete, or whatever you want to call the foundation, poured. And so that gave me a sense of, I'll be okay. I had no idea. And I had to, for someone like myself that liked to be in control of things, I had to let go. And that was really hard, but I had no option, Jesse. I had to just do it.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a surrendering process, it sounds like.
Yes.
So, Sally, let's talk a little bit about creativity, creative thinking, because, there's some people, as we know, you're in Victoria at the moment. It's lockdown presently, and hopefully for not too much longer. But I just want to talk about creative thinking and what you can take from the creative arts you've spent a lot of your life in, and applying that to business. You've obviously been able to meld those two elements of your life. But the thought of creative thinking is perhaps not something that you necessarily associate with business or with dentistry in particular. But I believe that creativity exists pretty much everywhere. So how do you foster creative thinking?
Okay, that's a really good question, and it's a good one for the moment. So really, I like to put it into just a few words. Creative thinking is a bit like putting on 3D glasses. So if you imagine for a moment that you go and see a 3D movie and you've got your 3D glasses in your hand, you sit down in this theatre, the movie comes on and you've just still got your glasses in your hand, and you go, wow, this is a good movie, loving this, fantastic. Then you realise, oh my gosh, I haven't got the glasses on. You put them on, and suddenly you see virtually a totally different movie. The movie comes alive. There's parts of the movie that you didn't see before because you didn't have the glasses on. And if you want to put that in a simplistic way, that's what creative thinking is about. And I don't know, Jesse, if you remember sort of, you can get postcards that are sort of 3D postcards.
Yeah, the ones you tilt.
Yeah, and you move them around and suddenly go, or, those books that you can get we had them as a kid, which, got sharks and sort of, creatures from the depths and dinosaurs. And you look at them without the glasses on, you go, oh, there's nothing wrong there. You put them on and you go, oh my gosh, that's scary.
Yeah.
So I say to people, think about creative thinking is about putting those glasses on and just looking at your life and thinking, my gosh, what is it that I've missed? What is it that I haven't seen? What is it, even in the most basic way? I lived in a suburb where there was a train into Melbourne City, and I usually would catch the tram. And one of my neighbours said, just get the train one day. And I did. Same thing, creative thinking. I saw a totally different part of Melbourne that I had never seen before. So I thought I was seeing the backs of buildings instead of the fronts of buildings.
Yeah.
So creative thinking is really about looking at, in the simplest way, and I can tell you a bit more about the creative visioning that I do in Melbourne Uni's researching this part of my work at present, but it's really about putting on new glasses, new lens, looking at your world through new lens.
So tell me a little bit about the Melbourne Uni stuff. What's happening there?
Okay, so this is so cool. It took me quite a few years to get into Melbourne Uni. What I put together was, okay, let me just go back a few steps. I knew that there was a way to be able to get business people, corporates, individuals, professionals thinking creatively in a short amount of time. And as a musician, when we are performing, we virtually go into flow state when you're playing the music, because you just automatically go into that state. And I thought, how can I recreate that feeling of going into a flow state where your brain, and this is all about the brain, where the dopamines in the brain come forward and the feel-good dopamines, and you start to look at your world in new eyes. So I thought, I've got to put this into a process. So I put a vision mapping process together, which is based around music, vision mapping, and putting a collage together when you've got a challenge that you've been trying to solve. So the core of this process is music, because I chose music. It's a piece of Mozart that I knew would immediately change people's minds and their brains. And so once you've got that change within someone who's negative, they start to see possibilities. And I talk people through about a 5-minute vision mapping exercise about changing the challenge into, a positive. Then I get them to write about it, and then they put a collage together. Now, according to one of the CEOs or directors at Deloitte, he said it was the fastest way they ever solved a problem.
Wow.
So it's quite simple. It's really about our brains and how our brains have the adaptability. As you probably know, the plasticity of the brain is around at that stage. So instead of the negative Nellies, you start to go, oh my gosh, and it's the music that drives you. And that's a part that Melbourne Uni wants to research, the power of music on the brain and how it affects decision making within businesses. And they've called it the science of music on the brain for problem solving.
That's really interesting. So have they given you any insight, or do you have any insight about what's happening biochemically, or what's going on from a chemical point of view, or even a neuron point of view?
Look, because a neuroscientist is doing this, and I don't have that yet, because I said it would be great to go into one of those MRI just to see what was happening during that particular period. But certainly I know from all of my clients that have done the vision mapping, it's the first process that they go through, because they want to be changed from struggling and challenged and negative into seeing a positive way ahead. And it's the first thing they say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I forgot that I loved doing this, or I loved cooking, or I loved painting, or I realize that I need to read more. I need to do this. I need to do that. So what it does is, you imagine if someone tells you that you've got to change. I know for myself, I'll probably go, no, I'm just going to do it my way. But with music, it takes you there, and you can't help it, and it opens you up. And the positive hormones, or whatever you want to call them, you guys that know that stuff better than I would, it just floods the brain. So you start to immediately think positively. So if you just think for a moment, Jesse, if you hear a piece of music that you love, so you get in the car one morning and you're feeling a bit off, and then you put on, the radio or whatever you want to put on, and you hear a great piece of music you love, your mood immediately changes, doesn't it?
It sure does.
So that's the most simple way to explain it.
It's really interesting. And again, my father was a musician, Sally.
Ah, okay.
Different genre of music to yours, but it's really interesting. I grew up with a very musical house. There's always music playing in the house. And I think it's perhaps, I can't play a note, unfortunately. I seem to be tone deaf, but notwithstanding that, I certainly believe that music helps change my mood a great deal. I know that if I'm in a bit of a, I don't know, Debbie Downer and I'm feeling a bit, then I put on something upbeat and happy, and I think we intuitively get that. But the idea of being able to have enhanced creativity around that is fascinating. And I want to ask you, Sally, do you think we're all creative, or do you think some people are just not.
We're all creative.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, we all have that within us. And I've worked with all sorts of people, from engineers that I can remember the first time I actually ever did the program, put the program together. And it was with a group of engineers. I was so nervous. I thought, they're just not going to get it. And they did. And then they also said to me afterwards, they said, look, I played a musical instrument when I was at school. I love music. And they said, I've realised that I've just sort of put that stuff to one side. And it was like one group entered the room and another group left. It was it was so different. And I will say this too. I mean, the reason I put this together was many years ago when I was at the Aussie Ballet, and the major sponsor, and they still are, is Telstra. And the CEO of Telstra just popped in to watch a rehearsal. And he was only there 5 minutes, and we were sitting down afterwards having a coffee. And he said to me, I've got to tell you, Sally, I'm a bit embarrassed, but he said, in that 5 minutes, I solved the most massive problem I've had that I've been trying to solve for weeks and weeks. And I just laughed at him. I said, Frank, I said, what happened? You're in a creative environment. That logical side of the brain stopped sort of working, and the creative one just booted up. And I said to him at the end, I'm going to find a way to bottle this when I leave the ballet.
Yeah, wow.
I did.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, Sally, one of the things that I believe, as we just spoke about, like you do, is that all of us have creative impulses. All of us have elements of creativity in the work that we do, and yet we seem to get stuck. We seem to, lose sight of what we are good at. And obviously you've spoken about music as a way of doing that. Creativity shows up in lots of different ways in business, problem solving, marketing, management of teams. But in the work that you do, where do you see creativity having the most impact in the way that people go about their business life?
Okay, that's an interesting question, because at the moment I'm working a lot with some health groups at the moment around communication and being creative, because also when I look at the challenge within those who are running some of these groups, they're smart, they're interesting people, but they've got a bit down because they're having challenges at the moment, especially with the virus, with people being really negative. So we've done a lot of work around reframing questions, reframing mindset, really understanding that we all have different ways of communicating and understanding those. But what I want to emphasize too, Jessie, is that when, with creativity, it has to come from the person who's running an organization, a business, whatever. First of all, you've got to be the person that's prepared to do the work.
Yes.
And when I say work, you've got to embrace it. So at the moment, it's a lot around, communication. And then with quite a number of people too, it's about, I've got another woman who's a CEO, and she has an arts background, would you believe it? And she's got the two sides. She's got the very analytical side, and she's also got the creative. So I'm getting her back in touch now with her creative self. Mm-hmm. And she's just about to get a position on an arts board, which is going to be fantastic. So Great. she can really channel that creative part. But I like to suggest to people, it's important to start to really allow yourself, give yourself permission. I call it be the best version of yourself. And how would you, by just letting go of that, we call it in psychology, protector controller part, and just sort of being a bit sort of mad, being a bit out there, being, sort of being the person that you would love to be. And that it's important to look at what really are your passions and what's your purpose in life. And I know from university days, I imagine there's probably quite a few dentists listening to this. There are a lot of medical people doing music. When I was at the conservatorium, it was really interesting. And so I imagine that it sits there.
I think it does. I know lots of dentists who are very musical. I'm thinking of one of my clients in particular, Ollie, who's a very, very dab hand at piano, and I think he plays the cello as well. And he said he had an injury, and I remember him saying he was worried about not being able to play, and that was his big worry. Sally, we spoke a little bit about psychotherapy and mental wellness and other things like that. We're recording this, in September 2020, and of course, COVID is still around, particularly where you are in Victoria. And I'm curious to ask about mental wellness, mental fitness, whatever language you want to put around that, being able to be resilient. Resilient is a word that gets used a lot these days.
Exactly.
Where do you see things happening in that space? Do you feel that people are coping well? Do you feel that people are not coping well? What practices could be put in place to help people adapt and cope well?
Sure. Look, it's interesting. I had quite a long conversation with a well-known person in the legal fraternity this morning, and we were talking about that sort of whole area, and he was saying, sort of there was someone that suicided within his firm, I think at the beginning of the virus a few months ago. And I said, well, what's happening within the firm? How are they coping with it? And I wasn't sort of so sure that a lot was being done, because I feel that mental wellness and mental health has to come from the top down. Mm. It has to come from the person at the top that recognises whether you're medical profession, legal, accounting, whatever you're in, hospitality, the arts, the person at the top has to really have a deep understanding that mental health and mental wellness is around all of us. Mm. And it's time that we've got to stop just, smothering it and not letting people talk about it, because often it's a lot about the person at the top trying to sort of cover over some of their challenges. Mm. And I believe that at this stage, certainly resilience training and being resilient is a better word. It's a word that people seem to like or prefer. I've got a friend, actually a teacher who lives next door to me, and she said they're putting in a lot of resilience training into schools at present. Mm. And I feel if we also rename it, resilience training, it's basically the same thing. It's about mental health and mental wellness, but we've got to take the stigma away, and we've got to take away the feel-good stuff of, I know some of the arts groups are saying, we've got sort of telephone lines that people can ring. Well, wait a minute, come on. You've got to really be there for people. You've got to be able to ask the hard questions. How are you feeling? What's happening? What's not happening? And you've got to feel comfortable about that. And I feel that a lot of organisations at this stage are not ready to ask those hard questions. Mm.
Why do you think they're not ready to ask the hard questions? What do you think is going on?
They're not. I don't believe they're accepting it yet, Jesse. I think unfortunately it's as simple as this. It's that, and I will say this about, world that I came out of, the arts, that they're not yet accepting that it's going to be tough for, especially the arts world, that a lot of people won't go back into work. And I believe that some of the people that are heading up arts organisations, that they just won't accept that. They won't accept it themselves.
So I think, what I'm hearing you say then is, there's this massive issue around mental wellness and mental health. And so we want to make sure that we're adopting these things. But of course, it's going to come from being brave enough to talk about it, being brave enough to kind of get rid of the stigma, to get rid of, all of the things that, have traditionally been associated with mental health issues. Is it as simple as talking about it to break down those barriers, or is there more to it?
Initially, it's as simple as actually, do you know what it is, Jesse? It's as simple as having someone who can hear you. Mm. Do you know, that to me, and I can remember from many years ago, it was having, and I don't even remember who the psychologist was, but it was the first person that I spoke to about my life falling apart. And it was just having someone that was, what's the word? When they don't take sides, when someone doesn't take sides.
Yeah, they're impartial.
Impartial, that was the word. And it was a woman, she just heard me, and it was like I had lost the rock that was sitting on top of me. And I believe that really it's about being heard. Mm. And quite often it's, I don't even think she gave me some solutions. I just felt like, oh my gosh, I'm not destined for the nut house. And, it's one of those things. And I lived in America in 97 and did a lot of more work around psychology. And I remember talking to a woman, Joan Halifax, who runs this extraordinary centre in New Mexico. And I was pretty challenged at that time. And she just listened for an hour, didn't say a word. By the time I walked out, I had everything solved.
But there you go.
So there you are. It's about having someone who absolutely listens. And I walked out feeling like I'd somehow solved whatever. I can't even remember what it was.
And if having someone to listen to, and therefore perhaps being that person that listens, it seems to me there's a great song. It's a Cat Stevens song. And one of the lyrics in that song is, "From the moment I could talk, I was ordered to listen."
Yeah.
And I quite like Cat Stevens' music, actually.
Yeah, I like him too.
And so I'm curious to ask you, there seems to be a lot of talking in the world at the moment and a little less listening.
Yeah, and to me, I mean, I just won't even look at what's happening in America. I just go, forget this. And what I've done is I don't know if I mentioned about the app that I got in touch with, Insight Timer, and that's, and I've been able to sort of really get myself flowing with people that are more, how can I put it, into meditation and into neuroscience, et cetera, et cetera. But in talking about, all the words that are happening around the world at the moment, I almost think, and you just have to go on Facebook to see some of the wrong assumptions that are happening. And I feel it comes from almost, we did this in psychology, a collective unconscious that is really nervous, that's scared, that doesn't know what's going to happen in the future. They have to start talking. They have to go and buy their rolls of toilet paper. It's almost like it's a mass herd way of dealing with what's happening at the moment. Instead of really taking some time to just go away and just be yourself. And look, we will come out of this. I mean, we won't come out of it perhaps the way we thought we would. But, I mean, certainly, Jessie, I have to say, in talking about, sort of connecting with people, I'm talking to a lot more people when I take my dog for a walk down to the dog park. I mean, and I think people are being, starting to be kinder, but I think on social media especially, there's a lot of people that just don't stop.
It's really interesting that you bring up social media. I was given a book actually as a gift. It was about a year ago, and I can't remember the exact title, so I'm going to butcher it. But it's about 10 reasons why you should give up social media, in essence. And reason number one, and forgive the language, ladies and gents, but reason number one in the book was because it makes you an arsehole. It was basically what it is. And I think it's really interesting because in social media, and to pick up that thread, I use social media, it's effective for what it's used for, but I do feel like sometimes there can be a lot of shouting, there can be a lot of posturing, there can be a lot of, I don't know, just talking and not so much listening.
Yes, and look, quite often people get things around the wrong way too.
Totally.
I mean, when you think about it, they just get things totally wrong, and they're putting this out on social media.
Yeah. And look, I think around that again, you see things on social media and it's easy to form a view and opinion about what you read, and that might or might not be the intended, message that was put out. And I've certainly been, able to misunderstand things or misinterpret things, and I'm not alone in that. But I just, the reason I bring this up, Sally, is one of the things I think that's come out of COVID, if there is a positive, and I think there are some really great positives actually, but I like to think that one of the positives that's come out of COVID is the fact that we are potentially listening a bit more, hopefully, that we're perhaps reevaluating what we do want from our lives and realizing that perhaps some of the things we did before were not so great. Do you have a view on that?
Look, I feel exactly the same. I feel that certainly I can only talk for myself, that I feel like I've softened a lot, and I feel that even in the supermarket, instead of rushing in and rushing out, I'll sort of be wandering around and smile or talk to, even though we've got masks on here, you talk to people, and I feel that somehow, the other day I was walking Sienna, my dog, to the park, and a woman just stopped me, and I didn't even know him. We started talking about dogs, and we started talking about sort of life in general at the moment. And it was a really beautiful conversation. And I walked away sort of feeling like, wow, if that's all I need in a day, I feel pretty happy. And I'm not even talking about business stuff at this stage. And Jessie, also, to be honest, it's interesting, I'm thinking about this now. I've found with a lot of business people, I haven't really had to come up against anyone who's hard and tough and scary at this stage. I don't know where they are. They've probably retreated to their dens or something like that. Maybe
they've just reevaluated their approach to life. Perhaps, I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, because it's actually interesting that all the conversations that I've had have been really quite caring. People have not been hounding me too much, and because I get a lot of emails, and I'm sure you do too. But it's sort of like, I think I definitely think there's a positive out of this. And I was on a streaming service last night for the Age newspaper that we get here in Melbourne, and I love cooking, as you might have worked out. And there was a streaming from Ben Shrewy, who has the 5-star Attica restaurant here in Melbourne, and he was cooking this Gruyere and onion tart, and it was pretty amazing. And it was brilliant. I think they had 1,000 people, who'd actually booked in, which was fabulous. And then the question was asked, well, how are you coping with, COVID at the moment? And he said, look, I've got 40 staff. And he said, they're all employed at the moment. And he said, we've turned our model around into a takeaway. And we take away, we deliver all our takeaways. And I actually thought to myself, knowing the way that restaurants run, I bet he's making more profit. I bet he's less stressed, because running a 5-star restaurant, I know the profit in a 5-star restaurant is minimal.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if in a few weeks' time, whether that model of what he's doing at the moment will stay, and he may not go back to this great restaurant that he had before that won 5 stars and was one of the 10 best restaurants in the world.
Oh, goodness. Well, who knows? I think that's interesting. And that comes back to the creativity, isn't it? Because I think one of the things with COVID is it has forced creativity.
Well, exactly. And, I mean, I even read in The Age, too, that, he delivers all his gorgeous food he's got a Porsche, he sort of turns up. But isn't that good? You get your delivery and, you get 5-star treatment. You don't have a guy sort of putting.
You don't have the guy with the hot box on his back as he's pedaling down.
You get absolute, I just thought, and he said his kids even asked him about that. And I said, well, that's really cool. How smart is he?
Yeah, absolutely. Sally, when it comes to business, what do you think at the moment that business owners really need to be thinking about? What do you think they need to be considering? Whether it's creative thinking, whether it's around, maintaining mental wellness or mental fitness, or whether it's about something else. What do you think is going to separate the people that, come out of this and do really, really well versus those that might not?
It's actually all of those, Jesse. What I would say, and I look at what I used when I went through all that terrible time years ago, and it was my mental wellness that was the most important thing. So I started meditating every day, and I would suggest that, if you're challenged at the moment, start meditating. Honestly, it works. It absolutely works. I used to do it on planes. I used to do it anywhere where I was traveling. It's just something, and you don't even have to do it for long. 10, 15 minutes, just meditate, and you will find after a while it'll just calm you down. But also just be aware of your mindset too, because it's very easy. And look, I caught myself going down a slippery slide, quite a few times. And I know when we got the third lockdown, I went and ate my way through a big block of chocolate, and I felt worse afterwards.
Yeah.
So I thought, this is going to get worse. Come on, Sally, just do something about it. So this is also about, really, you have to be creative. You've got to look at how you can leverage your business, your career, what you're doing. Because, look, I'll give you a bet. I mean, whoever's listening to this podcast, if I went through every person, I could find at least 1 or 2 things that you're not even putting value on.
Yeah.
Because we tend to undervalue sort of stuff that our passions, our purpose, and our expertise.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely 100% agree with that. And I think there's a lot of people I know in dentistry, at least, that are now coming up with some really cool inventions, people launching some new businesses. Like what you did, you're combining your passion with your work and coming up with something new and different. And I think there's opportunity around that too.
Well, I suppose if you think, quite often you've got to sit and wait in a dentist's, waiting room. So what can you sell them as well?
Yeah, exactly. That's why not? That's exactly right. Sally, I just want to touch on the food thing for a moment, because I know food is something that you love and are really passionate about. And so I want to ask you, just as we wrap up, if you were to have a dinner party, assuming that you could in Melbourne at the moment, but when things lift and you can, if you could have a dinner party, I'd like to ask you 2 questions. What would the meal be? Because I know you'd probably cook up a storm. And secondarily, if you could invite 5 or 6 people over, who would you have? Doesn't matter whether they're alive or past. Who would you have?
Oh, my gosh, that's really putting me on the spot. Actually, I'm glad, because the creative in me enjoys this. Okay, well, I would start off with something so simple, because I just love it. It's just fresh oysters, but I would get finger limes, and I just love finger limes. That, they look like caviar. So I'd make a dipping sauce, with probably some fish sauce and some vinegar and some chili and some garlic and a bit of water. So that would start off the meal with a treat, and then serve it with some beautiful French bubbly and a nice fine bead. And then for the main course, I love fish. I virtually don't eat any meat. So I would get a whole salmon. And what I would do is I haven't done this for a while, actually. I just cover it with a lot of fresh herbs. So I just cover it with heaps of fresh herbs, and then I put lots of cut up lemons and put them in the centre of the salmon, and then wrap it up. And you can either do it on a barbecue or in your oven and just let it gently steam. And what I'd serve with this, and they're called Gary's potatoes. It's a friend of mine who was the artistic director of the NZ Ballet. And he said no one cared about my artistic direction, but it was all about my potatoes. and so I'd just parboil some potatoes. I would then sort of scrunch them up in a pan when they're halfway cooked, then put them in a roasting pan and put quite a bit of oil with them and some salt, and just roast them so they're crisp on the outside. And then put a beautiful just green salad. That's all you need with that. So you've got beautiful salmon, you've got your potatoes, and then you've got some avocado with the salad. And then at the end, see, I've changed in the last few years. I'm a real cheese person. I love good cheese. And the place that I love it is from Bruny Island in Tasmania. So I would get one of their deliveries, and you never know what you're going to get. And well, you sort of do, but I like to not know. And so I get a hard cheese, I would get a soft, and I'd get a smelly.
Okay, there you go. Sounds great.
So you're coming for dinner?
I was going to say, can I be one of these 5? I'm sitting here. I've actually had to turn my head away from the microphone because I started salivating. I didn't want to be making noises, down the microphone. So I was sitting there going, "Oh my God, I'm getting famished thinking about that." That sounds fantastic. And who would you have? Who would you invite?
Oh, that's right. Of course.
Who are the people that you would interview? You'd like to have people with stimulating conversation. Whose minds would you like to have there?
And there are people, some of them I'm thinking just straight away. Well, Justice Ginsburg, who just died, I think she'd be unbelievable. Then I would have Bernstein, the composer and conductor.
Yeah.
Then let me think. They would probably be creative people. Oh, I'll tell you who I would have. I would love to have, what's her name, Diane Dutta, who's the actress from The Good Fight. Do you watch that show?
Yes, Diana. She's got a Polish Krasik.
Yes, she's Polish, I think. I would have her.
Yeah.
And then I would have a young spunk of some sort.
All right.
I'm trying to think. It would probably be one of the Cuban ballet dancers because they're pretty hot. And the fifth person, oh my gosh, I'm just thinking it could be. No, actually, I'd like to have Nigella. I think Nigella, or the other person, and I'm going to 6, is Monty Don. The guy that does the gardening programs.
Yep. There you go.
So there you are. So there'll be a few of us. Yes, Monty Don, he's really interesting. Nigella, I think she'd be pretty interesting too.
I think it'd be a really robust and fun conversation. I'm sure there'd be a lot of laughs at that table. I think it'd be a good, fun night out. Sally, I want to say thank you to you because it's been a really fun time to talk to you. But beyond the fun that I've obviously had talking to you, it's been really insightful. You've shared some really practical, some really useful things and incredibly thought-provoking ideas. Now, for anyone listening to this, the best place to find you is creatingencores.co, correct?
That's right, exactly, yes. And then on LinkedIn, I go under Sally Arnold, Creating Encores.
Great. So, ladies and gents, if you want to find out more about Sally's work, and I'd really encourage you to do so, she's got some wonderful resources as well. Head across to creatingencores.co or look her up on LinkedIn, and she's also around on Instagram and Twitter as well. And I'd really encourage you to connect with Sally through the usual channels. But Sally, thank you once again for being such a fabulous guest, and it's been a lot of fun talking to you today.
I've loved it, Jesse, and so good to see you again, and thank you for the opportunity.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green. For more free tools and resources, join the free Facebook group. Visit drjessegreen.com/Facebook. And for more episodes, visit drjessegreen.com/savvydentist.